Welcome to the Ranchonomics podcast, where we empower you to build a better ranch and transform your operations into a thriving business. I'm your host, John Haskell. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Ranchonomics podcast. I am here today with Wally Olson, and we are going to talk about working with cattle buyers. One of the things that we hear constantly is how much people hate working with cattle buyers. And since we work in a people business, and cattle buyers are a very important part of the process, I think that is a very bad approach to things. Now, it doesn't mean everybody has to work with one. But Wally, you have given me a lot of advice over the years about how to work with cattle buyers, and I would like to get your thoughts on that. Wally, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Very good. The first thing you need to do is, if you're going to work with a buyer, is go to him and look at cattle together so you know what you're both looking at. The biggest problems I've had with buyers is my dereliction of duty of going and doing diligence and what I should have done. In other words, I just called them up and ordered cattle. And back to rules and culture, if you're going to the Southeast and you're from Wyoming, rules and culture are a little different down there, and you need to go down there and learn how to do business. And it's one of the biggest things. And then have it clear and concise on what your order is. And I like to talk about working total dollars and not cents per pound. Or what I'm talking about there is, if you order cattle, for 500-pound cattle for $2 a pound, and they get higher, what you'll do is you'll get weight creep. The price won't go up, but the weight will creep up. And $2 a pound, a 525-pound calf costs a lot more than a 500-pound calf. And you just need to be aware of that, and you just need to do your diligence, and then you got to keep them honest. And you need to have a network, so you need to know somebody that knows whoever you're dealing with. Word of mouth is, to me, the greatest way to find a buyer.
So one degree of separation that knows that person.
Correct. Yeah. 1 degree of separation.
And our industry is small enough in the U.S. that we can usually achieve that even across pretty wide geographic spread.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to ask a little more about this total dollars per head, dollars per pound. When you're working for a buyer and we're in a sell-buy context, are you explaining to them all of the principles of sell-buy, or how do you set up what you're trying to do?
Basically, I do not try to explain sell-buy to any buyer unless I know that he has looked into it and understands it. Rather, I'm not going to get in. I'm going to give them an order, because most order buyers will buy a class of animals for you. They won't buy the most undervalued animal between queen classes. So you got to figure out what class you want to buy and put the order out with them.
So maybe we've made a barn card and we have some parameters. We want to buy a 5-weight calf at $2, $2.50 a pound, whatever the number is. And so you'll visit with him about those specs and then cap it per head. So if you can buy a smaller animal, for example, at a higher price per pound, but it's the same price per head, or a bigger animal at the same price per head, that's the constraint. Maybe you talk about 50 or 100 pounds plus or minus.
Yes.
Okay.
50 or 100 pounds is a good range. And also, when you get to working with some buyers and they start understanding, they will call you back and say, look, what you're trying to buy today, we can't buy them, but we can buy these. And so you work through it real quick, or you already know and say, that's fine, go ahead. And one thing you need to understand that in buying, and I'm going to tell a story here about buying, is that I had cattle on the Corn Belt Classic Superior sale one year, and I went up to the sale, so I was there. And we sold 4 loads, I think, of feeder heifers beforehand. The first day and the second day, they were selling calves, and I had found loads of heifer calves to buy back. And there was a gentleman with Eastern Livestock, Tommy Gibson, that was sitting behind me. And these heifers that I could buy started coming in, and I'd bid on them, and Tommy Gibson would bid on them, and Tommy'd buy them. And so this happened 2 or 3 times. And then on the 4th time, by God, Olson was pissed. And by God, I just bought them, and I gave $5 or $6 a hundred more than the other loads had been selling for. And then I was really mad, and the next load came in while I was stewing around there, and all of a sudden that load sold for $5 or $7 less than I could give for it. And I had done business with Tommy Gibson. He was an order buyer, and I got up and went back and said, Tommy, boy, I missed that last load. Would you sell them to me? And he marked them up 50 cents, 100 to me. So by letting Tommy buy a load for me and me buy a load, I got back to what I could pay for those.
Where you needed to be.
Yeah, or maybe I should have just, and I'm a big advocate of using order buyers. Now, if you are absolutely just, I call it a trader that's willing to buy any animals, and that's part of your business plan. You do the buying, that is fine. But order buyers do a good service, and I use them.
And tell me a little more about why. So we both know they're good order buyers and they're bad order buyers, just like they're good and bad of everything. But why is that person such an important resource?
Well, one thing is he can, that's what he does. He sits on those seats and buys cattle. So he sees
like all day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week. Yeah.
He sees things that you don't see. And it's just like anything else, muscle memory. If you just go in to buy one day, and also bear in mind that an order buyer on commission is the most fickle person, in my humble opinion, that's out there. Because if you come in and start taking away his commissions, and since they are also working with other people's money, sometimes they will use other people's money to wool you around. And as long as the rules set up that you can buy, that's fine. Let them wool you around. As long as you're getting cattle bought, they're profitable. But most of the time, you'd be like me and dealing with Tommy Gibson, you get mad, and you just need to understand that.
Do you ever ask a buyer if he's got, so if I want a 6-weight heifer, let's say, do you ever ask if he's got other bids for that same thing and if my bid's going to work in his?
No, I never asked that. This is my order. And he said, I can't fill it.
Because he's got one for 30 cents higher than you.
Yeah, they'll tell you that.
Okay. And then as far as quality of cattle, like you mentioned, going and seeing them and looking at stuff is great. The one thing I think that we need to always reemphasize is that when we're talking about buying underpriced cattle, we're definitely not talking about junk. And most cattle buyers, and they vary, if they are trying for a price, we want to make sure that they really understand that we want the highest quality calf you can buy at that price.
That's correct.
It doesn't have to be a front pasture calf, but it needs to be a darn sure good calf.
A good calf, yeah. Right. And so they understand. And also, some people you can work with, there's cattle that you can upgrade. And like I said, you just need to work with the buyers and understand that sometimes there's going to be something show up. But also, if something shows up that is absolutely not what you ordered, you just put them back on the truck. And that'll take care of that problem, because I promise you, if you ever put cattle back on a truck for an order buyer, you aren't going to do business with him again.
It's the last time with that person. All right, good. Now, the other phrase that you taught me to say many years ago was along the lines of something to the effect of, would you consider selling these after we've grown them? And having them buy cattle that they know they could resell keeps you within a quality parameters that keeps them reasonable.
Yes, no, that's a very good point. So they're in the commission business. They can get 2 commissions out of one calf. That doesn't get much better than that. And let them know that these are going to be for sale. And working with people and having that relationship that they know what you have and know that you will sell animals, and it really works out well for everybody concerned. Now, they may call you up and you may not be quite ready to sell them, but you maybe need to think about it. My dear old dad said, when somebody comes along and wants to buy something, by God, you price it. And if you don't want to sell it, you just price it hellishly high and get your price going down the road.
Yeah, but I think when you develop a reputation with buyers as someone that is willing to sell, it can make your life a lot easier.
Oh, yes.
Because I've had this multiple times where they'll have a partial load nearby and they want to get it filled. So they might be very willing to pay a premium for the last 10,000 pounds to go on that load. When they call out of the blue, it's a wonderfully pleasant surprise. Boy, I'm going to sell cattle I didn't even plan to sell today. for a really good price. That's a good relationship. Let's talk a little more about the selling side. So we hear people cuss buyers all the time. Let's talk about sellers, because then we hear people complain about commission all the time. And boy, they're going to save money on commission. Let's talk a little about working. Let's start with sale barns first, and then let's talk about some of the other selling options.
Well, one thing, when you're working with a sale barn, first you need to know the manager or the owner and understand that they work for you. You pay the commissions. The buyers there, they work for whoever they're buying cattle for. The sale barn, by golly, better work for you and get to know them so they know who you are. And if you're going to sell cattle, this back to my dear old dad. He said, if you're going to work all year, you by God show up when you're going to sell them. And so you're sitting there.
And for those people that are unfamiliar, when you are at a sale and they are selling your cattle and they know you're there and they know who you are, they usually introduce you, right? They usually do a better job of describing your cattle. They might ask you a question. Somebody might have a question about, hey, what shots had these calves gotten? When were these cows bred, or what were the bulls like? And so your willingness to answer those questions in real time when people are bidding is helpful. And then usually they will give you a few more going once, going twice opportunity to get a few last bids in.
Yeah,
right?
They have, if the cattle have a story, they're probably worth more. And I will tell you one thing about when I sold some cows just this spring. One of those cows had an abscess years ago, but she still had on her jaw. And they came in and somebody saw that. And I was sitting there and I said, that is just an old abscess. And the vet has looked at her and there's absolutely nothing wrong with her. So consequently, she didn't get cut off the set of cows. And if she would have, it would have probably been a $300 or $400 or $500 hickey on my part. You need to be there.
Those little things make a difference. Gotcha.
Right.
Now, when you take cattle to the sale barn, do you tell them how you want them sorted? Do you let them sort? What do you do there?
Depends on what it is. And usually I try to have them sorted up in potload lots so they walk off the truck and walk into the ring and they sell. Like I talk about, load them at 11 and sell them at 1.
Which is possible if you live 30 minutes from the sale barn, but that would be harder to do in other parts of the country.
And like I said, you need to understand the system, how the system works. And you just need to spend time educating yourself on how the sale barn works.
One thing we've talked about in the past also is, in my opinion, asking the sale barn owner, asking your marketing professional how you can be a good customer of them, right? How can I help you do your job? And there are two things I want to talk about there. And one is I really want to make sure people have the mentality that whoever they're working with on the buying and the selling, that person is a sales and marketing professional. We want their expertise because it helps us do a better job. And then the other is, let's be a good customer. So it's one thing to go into the sale barn and be really demanding, but it's a whole nother to really set the sale barn up for success with your cattle. Most of us show up, dump them off, and leave. That doesn't really help anybody. If we sell those cattle for more money, the sale barn or the commission agent makes more money. And we make more money, and we are all on the same team there. So you want to expand on that just a little?
Well, to me, like you said, you just need to have your cattle set up to be successful. If you got a clinker or a cut, don't try to hide them in there. Be completely transparent with what you have and understand what you have. If you got junk, that's fine, but you understand that they're junk. Describe them correctly.
Most of the time in the brand areas of the U.S., and even in other parts, we can usually figure out where the cattle come from. And that can have good ramifications and bad. So sometimes you'll have a situation where you sell something through a sale barn and one of the buyers will call years later and say, hey, I bought some heifers from you. Do you have any more of those to sell? And you're thinking, I've never met you before. Where did you get my number? Oh, I bought them through the sale barn. And like, oh, okay. Yeah, maybe we could talk. And the opposite is true. I know there are lots of cases where I bought a calf with that brand on at one point. It was the dirtiest piece I've ever handled. And so people remember those things.
Correct.
Especially if they're extremely good or extremely bad. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other avenues for sales. So there's the local sale barn. Let's talk a little about the video.
You can sell on the video, and I truly love the video auction because if it doesn't work out, you do not have huge amount. If you're going to take them into the sale barn, you probably are not going to no sale them and haul them back home. There's just too many costs there. Whereas with the video auction, you have a $3 or $4 video fee. And if you sell them later on the video, there's very minor ramifications. One thing, though, if you put them up on the video too many times and you start doing that, people are not going to bid on your cattle. Usually when I sell my cattle, I will sell on the video this is an absolute sale. They are going to sell, so bid up.
All right, so on that topic, how often do you no-sale cattle in a video auction or at the sale barn?
I have only no-saled them on the video auction once.
And what was their reason?
We didn't think they brought enough.
Okay.
And we discovered that they brought less when we did sell.
So this is something I've seen a bunch, and I have an experience of watching people no-sale cattle in 2016 at the July Spear sale because they didn't hit their income target. And boy, they missed it by a bigger gulf in August.
That's correct.
And then missed it by a bigger gulf later in the fall.
Usually my deal is, first is do your homework and have a pretty good idea of what they're going to bring. If you take them to the sale barn operators will have a pretty good idea of what they will bring.
And they will be very non-committal, but you can usually get them to give you an idea.
Yes. And the same way with your superior rep. They're in the business of selling animals. They'll pretty well have an idea unless some catastrophic thing happened.
Which is totally out of their control. So that's fair. Okay. But the other thing that you schooled me on many years ago when I sold a small load of cattle in Idaho shortly before Christmas, and I got absolutely schooled on those, was not just leave mad, but to go ahead and buy stuff back, right? Don't
Correct.
necessarily no-sale your cattle. But that particular day, I got hammered on mine, but there were a lot of other cattle that sold for really cheap that day.
Yes. You just need to understand what you're doing. Head up, eyes open. Usually don't get mad.
Yeah. Getting mad is the last helpful thing you probably need to do. Okay. So we've talked about selling through the sale barn. We've talked about selling with a rep. Oh, one other thing, commission on the video. Boy, I hear all the time about how people hate commissions on the video. What are your thoughts on that?
I hate commissions.
Oh, I understand.
I'm the greediest person in the world. I don't want that. What I do is I factor in and decide if the video auction is going to make what I could get for the cattle is going to make me money. So in other words, I will get paid for putting them on there and cover the commission.
Right.
And especially like right now, as high as cattle are, we really don't know. Last year, those cattle sold for $10 $100 more than I would have ever had guts enough to have asked for them at home.
And that probably paid the commission.
Probably paid the commission well.
Okay.
And the commission on the cattle we're going to sell this year.
And this is something that comes up a bunch, and I've done this 2 or 3 times when prices are high like this. You will watch a video auction, see the prices, and then talk to people privately. And we're going to work towards private here in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And they will often tell you, oh, I can't pay that much for them. I just watched you bid on a set that are a lot like them I can't pay that much. But boy, the auction does generally, when markets are high, the auction does drive prices up, particularly these big video auctions.
Correct.
And I think one of the things that if supply and demand is an issue, sales like Superior's big summer sales, Western's big summer sales, Producers has big sales, Cattle Country, Northern, these sales have hundreds of thousands of cattle in them, and they have lots and lots of buyers from all over the country. And part of good marketing, in my mind, is getting your cattle in front of the right audience.
Correct.
And boy, when you have a huge audience like that, the chance that someone is the right audience is a lot bigger than if you're just selling them at Miles City Stockyards, as an example. Okay. Very good. Let's talk about selling privately then. That's a good segue into that. Tell me about how do you do things at home? And I would also like you to, let's share the story that Bud used to talk about how the telephone kind of ruined selling at home.
I don't remember that.
Do you remember that story? No, Bud used to talk about this all the time. He talked in his schools about the fact that the telephone ruined selling at home because a buyer would come to your house and would make a bid on your cattle. And prior to the telephone, you would then negotiate and come to a price between the two of you. After the telephone, Bud's experience was you would bid on cattle at someone's house, and then they would say, I need to think about it, walk in the house and call your competitor and offer them the cattle for 2 cents higher. And if he outbid you while you're gone through all the trouble of going to their place, then they would sell them to him. That to me was an example of bargaining as opposed to marketing, but it also gave a little bit of insight into how these things work and why people behave the way they do in certain situations when they're buying off the ranch. When you have cattle to sell, where do you start?
First thing you do is you need to price your cattle.
You set a price.
You set a price. I will neither buy or I'm not going to buy and sell them. I'm not going to. And so
negotiate against yourself on both sides.
Yeah. So you need to set a price. And what you do is you just like for myself, I live in Oklahoma. I use the Oklahoma City or the Oklahoma City West market. I know that I'm not selling number one cattle. I'm selling pretty good cattle. And so what I do is I just take the price of number ones and the price of ones and twos and put them together and divide by 2. And that's the price I start at. Understanding that it's about $11 a hundred for me to get them sold in Oklahoma City. So when I'm negotiating a price, anything over that is where I'll sell them.
And even if it was equal to that, the good thing about that is what the price is before you ever bring them in the pen.
That's correct.
So if you don't get the price you want, you don't gather them, you don't load them, you don't go through any of that. Yeah.
But understand that you're taking on the responsibility of the sale barns are guaranteeing your money.
Correct.
So if you're trying to cheat somebody out of the commission, if you sell a load of cattle and you get a bad check, it's not fun.
So do you accept a check at delivery?
Depends on who I'm selling to. If I have no idea who you are, I probably wire the money. We are now doing stuff privately. We are using wiring money more than for the simple fact the mail is erratic and whether you're going to even get the checks.
Yeah.
And also, if you're talking about $100,000 load of cattle, if it takes a week for that check to get to you, and if you take that times 10% interest,
it's painful.
It's worth working. It's worth paying the other person's $15 wiring fee. I promise you.
Yep. Okay, so you've priced them. You maybe call some people that you can offer them around.
Yep.
And then what?
Then you got to understand the rules of selling, whether you're going to sell them, weigh them on the ground or weigh them on the truck. Need to understand what percent shrink you're going to give. Need to understand if you're going to put a slide on them or a weight stop, and that's a whole nother visit. And are they going to pick them up?
Who pays the freight? Where are they going to be?
Who pays the freight? And all the above.
Very good.
Because most feeder cattle, when you're dealing with an order buyer in the country, he is selling those cattle delivered to the yard. That's the way all cattle or feed yards buy them delivered to the yard. So he's got to factor in, he picks up the freight. So when he gives you a price, that's factored in there.
Yep. And we didn't talk about that in your pricing when you're buying. You also price them at the destination, correct, with your buyer?
When you order cattle, it's the same way. I give them an order. I have factored in the freight that it's going to cost. And what I do is I try to have the order buyer put his buying fees and the trucking on the sale barn receipt. So that when I buy cattle, if I buy them in the closest sale barn or if I buy them out of, Bonify, Florida, the cattle are equal when they hit my chute.
Yeah. Okay. But you do that calculation. You don't have them do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. I think hopefully we've covered most of these things. We've covered the video market, local sale barn. We've covered selling them privately. Another thing you encouraged me to do years ago, selling privately that maybe we haven't talked about, you had encouraged me when I was selling feeder cattle out of a grow yard to go develop relationships with big feed yards. So oftentimes we're selling to a buyer that commission buyer that we know personally and have worked with, but we also have the ability to develop relationships with other potential customers directly.
Yes.
And not necessarily with the intention of cutting out a buyer, because usually those guys have their own buyer, but making sure we understand what they're looking for and seeing if we can help them procure what they need. Right?
That's absolutely right. You need to understand what the people that you're selling to need.
So if you have weaned calves, you're usually selling to a grazer or a feeder. If you have a big feeder calf, you're usually selling to a feeder. Like understanding that market and what they need and want out of cattle is important.
That's absolutely correct.
And the great thing is there's a huge amount of diversity in that, right?
Yes.
Some people like big, fat, slick black cattle, and some people want a real green, hard type longhorn calf, and there's just a wide variety of.
And you need to understand the terminology, and I will tell you one of the biggest ones is they say a calf's carrying quite a bit of condition. That can either mean it's a fat-toed or it's thin. You got to understand what condition it is.
As far as prepping cattle for sale, is there a particular way you want them to look or be? So again, you hear all the time, oh, green cattle really sell. Boy, they sell well. And my observation is that it's not always true.
To me, it depends. Somebody talked about why you never want to sell a fat calf. Sometimes, depending on your system, and I'll give you an example, we graze a lot of cattle on dry, tall grass prairie in the Flint Hills. Those calves coming out of there are going to carry a lot of condition, or they're going to be pretty thin and hard. But people in the springtime of the year will pay a huge premium for that. This is what we can produce, and it's what they want. Yeah.
Yeah. The difference I run into is that sometimes a calf is thin because it's a poor doer, and sometimes it's thin because it hasn't had enough groceries.
That's right.
We have to market correctly. Okay. But the other thing is, just like with horses, I've found, and especially in cows, a cow with enough condition but not overly fat generally sells better than one that is actually thin.
No, if you're going to sell cows, you need to. Fat's pretty.
They need to be in sale condition.
Yeah, they need to have condition.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, I want to wrap up on one thing, and the last thing is something we spend a fair amount of time talking about, which is mindset. Again, I hear people complain about their buyers all the time. I hear people complain about buyers in general. I hear people complain about commissions. What are we doing? Why are we developing relationships with these people, and why are we paying money for that relationship?
To me, two of the biggest bitches is the order buyers and the damn truckers. And find the best. My truckers are great people. They're good at what they do, and I'm not going to drive a truck. And
I'm not going to load the truck.
Yeah, and same way with the buyers. Just get good ones. There's great ones out there, and get them.
And as with all things, the 80-20 rule probably applies, right?
That's
There's
right.
a segment of them that are excellent, and there's a whole bunch that are just okay. Yeah.
Just find them.
Yeah. Very good. But importantly, again, we are recruiting professionals into our business. We are making our business bigger.
Yep.
By using what they know and their time.
That's correct.
I could go sit at a sale barn 6 days a week, but if I am doing that, there's a whole bunch of other stuff I'm not doing. The sale barn has a big opportunity cost.
And another thing about using them is if you aren't buying cattle, you don't have to pay them. You're paying them to do a job. The truckers, you're paying them rather than you own the truck and have somebody working for you to drive the truck, or you drive the truck. If you need the truck, you rent it, and it's going to cost you so much, but there's no way you can own a truck unless that truck's on the road a lot. So just understand and rent stuff that you need. Rent the order buyer. That's what you're doing. You're renting the service of the order buyer, and you're renting the truck.
And that makes your business bigger. Right? At a very low cost.
That's correct.
Because it would cost a lot of money to have an employee go sit in the sale barn 5 or 6 days a week. But if I can pay on that per head, then on the days when I don't get anything bought, it does not cost me a thing.
That's correct.
And on the days I get everything I want, I have to pay for that. Okay. Again, I think reorienting ourselves and our attitudes so that we manage that relationship, we are ultimately responsible for the outcome of that relationship. Most of us need good marketing professionals in our life. The one other thing I think, and it relates especially to video sales and auctions and selling at home, is that person's network. If you're working with a professional buyer and their willingness to get on the phone and call people, it can be huge for your business. So if you have cattle to sell and you want 2 people to look at them, that's one thing. But if you have a buyer or a rep that has a lot of contacts, he probably understands those contacts and what they need and can find the best buyer for your cattle. And again, you are renting his time and paying for his expertise.
Correct.
And in the end, that should mean that you make more money. Awesome. All right. Wally, thank you very much. I appreciate you visiting about this. There will be more things that come up along this line, I'm sure. This is a topic that we could go on forever about, but you will wrap it up here. Thank you very much for listening. Wally, thank you for being here with us, and we will talk soon. Thank you for tuning into the Ranchonomics podcast. We hope this episode helped you win today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend.